Hey everyone! So, today I want to talk about something in a little more detail that I've mentioned before in other videos, but I haven't really talked about it in its own video for a bit. And I can't really cover everything in detail here because this is an extremely large topic. But I do want to talk about it a bit, and that is the concept of main weapon power. If you've seen almost any video of mine, you've probably heard me at some point say that I think main weapon power needs to go up, or push for main weapon power or main weapon buffs. I talk about this because I've released some videos talking about, middle-of-the-road weapons like Paintbrush and Tri-Stringer, and I have another video coming out in the future that's 5 weapon reworks that will be very similar in giving these weapons very generous buffs, or some kind of rework that drastically boosts their main weapon power. And I know some people might look at that and go like, is that too much? And I want to make it clear that that kind of philosophy on buffs that I have lines up with what I would do for stronger weapons. If we jump up, my personal ranking, for instance, and let's look at, a weapon I put as like a high tier, almost top tier weapon, like Dually Sculpture, for instance. Dually Sculpture is capable of winning big events. It's won multiple of them. It got second place in the King's Cup. That's probably the largest event we've had in a while in terms of competition. It literally almost won it. It's won in Turf War before. By all means and purposes, Dually Sculpture is a perfectly competitive weapon. It is perfectly good, and you could argue that the weapon and its kits would need absolutely no changes because it's already doing well. However, I advocate that the main weapon should get buffs, like some kind of smaller buffs obviously, but it should get buffs, and I think the special should get buffs. All without any tone back at all. Obviously, that would make Dually Sculpture one of the best weapons in the game. It would probably put it on par with our top 5 to 10 weapons right now. And that is exactly the point. That is where I want a lot of main weapons to be. I want them to feel like that, because I think the very top echelon of weapons, how they feel, the power level they're at, is where the majority of the game should strive to be. That's what I think is healthy for the game. So, why? That's what we're going to talk about today. Why do I want things to be that powerful? Because what I do want to get right off the bat before I go further into this is that I do think there's a limit with main weapon power. I'm not just trying to say just keep going with main weapon power up and up and up and up and up. Splatoon 1 felt very good because of its main weapon power. It did. However, Splatoon 1 did go too far, in my opinion. It works for that game, but it does not work for what Splatoon is nowadays. Luna with a clash radius is too much. Luna would not be broken in this game if it had a clash radius. That's not the problem. But the blast radius itself is just too large for how fast Luna moves compared to S-Blast. It's too overtuned. Splatoon 1 had a lot of these. Bucket burst combos were overtuned. Cherry H3 survivability with Wall Bubbler was overtuned, even if the main weapon wasn't his fault for that. There were things in that game, power-wise, with main weapons and without, that I think went too far. While I think some weapons should be in a similar spot, like I don't think range should feel that much worse, I think range's strength should be in other areas. I think range blaster should have an easier time going for directs, for instance, but its AoE should be weaker, which is kind of where Splatoon 3 has been going with it. So that kind of thing is also a factor. That said, I still think Splatoon 2, and therefore subsequently 3, which is, based on the balance of that game, has not gone far enough, not nearly, for most weapons. We've seen some weapons be pushed to this level, including a few newer weapons, like I think Wiper is very good, I think Wiper is fine, I think all the Splatanas are fine, frankly. I think that, something like S-Blast is good, I think Squeezer is probably in that spot, Slosher, Stamper, I've already said Stamper, stuff like that. But when I look at the majority of weapons in the game, I think that they should be generally stronger. There's some exceptions of lower down weapons, like 10s, but even then, I would still be fine with 10 getting slightly stronger, because I do think it still is good to have the main weapons be more powerful. Anyway, I think I'm rambling a bit with the intro at this point, so let's switch over to why. So I have 3 main reasons for this that I'm going to go over today, and this isn't everything in terms of main weapon power that I have to say. This is a much larger discussion that I could go on about for like an hour if I really wanted to. But I'm trying to have this video be somewhat comprehensive, so, hopefully this covers it well enough. So the first one is going to talk about agency as an individual. Things you can do as a solo player. So let's look at this from a solo queue instance, for example. Let's say that you're a player in solo queue and you're trying to do well, or you're matchmaking with random comps, for instance. In Splatoon 1, when the main weapon power was higher, what comp you rolled didn't really matter as much. Most comps you would roll would feel fine in a solo setting because the main weapon power was so high across the board that no matter what you got, you had a lot of main weapons that were capable of doing their own things. If you had a crack-on roller, which by the end of the game was not a very good weapon, it could still shark very effectively, get its kills, it had an invincibility special to make things happen, and it worked. And it would do well in a game. There's a whole ton of options like that. If your main weapons are powerful, and you get solo queue comps, you're going to have an easier time. It also means that you're going to have more of a game plan you can play to. You're going to have something you can do that'll, work more often of the time. You're going to have something that you can do to influence the game that won't be as limited, I guess. You'll have more options. If you play a weaker weapon in this game, oftentimes what can make a weapon weaker isn't the fact that it can't do something well, it's that what it can do is very limited, very linear, very transparent. So like if you play Vanilla Undercover, for instance, that weapon's main game plan is very much trapping with its mines and reef slider, baiting over extensions and playing for damage with either of those to combo with the slider for a kill, or slider cheesing the zone. There's obviously a little more to that, but in terms of the main game plan for Undercover, I've basically summarized it. You can't take any top-level weapon and summarize it that way. You can't take any top tier and simplify it down to that small bit. Like, none of them work that way. But a lot of lower-end weapons do work that way because they don't have the power stat to really do much else other than the one thing that actually works for them. So, second off, I want to talk about the idea of weapons being simplified and more dynamic balancing. When your main weapon power is lower, you are going to have more overlap generally. You can have lower down main weapons that have a lot of depth to them or have a lot of different mechanics. You can just make all of them pretty bad. But generally, when you're buffing a main weapon to a very high level, if you're taking a lower down weapon and buffing it in a more extreme way, you can afford to give weapons much more creative changes. Think about things like Splash getting no jump RNG, Swiffer's mid-air charge speed, Wiper being able to paint for itself with a horizontal swing so it can move differently. Stuff like that really only happens if you allow the idea that you're going to drastically improve the power of a main weapon. If you're okay with doing that, you can get very creative with changes. Look at Brella versus Recycle, for instance. Brella and Recycle right now are very similar. If you want to buff Recycle to be better, the simplest way to do it is to increase the shield HP, which will make it more like the other Brellas. If you look at Brella, the main thing to make it better is increasing the damage, which will make it more like Recycle. If you want to work around this problem, you will have to make the main weapons more distinct from each other. And if you want to make them more distinct from each other, you're probably giving some entirely new creative option to one of these weapons. It should be Recycle, spoiler alert. Brella should just get the damage. And so because of that, you can often be more dynamic with your weapons. And then when you have these weapons at the very top that are balanced this way, they can have a lot more variety as to the things they can do. The strengths and weaknesses they have could be more extreme. Think about Splatoon 1 Dynamo, for instance, right? You have this weapon with a bunch of damage, a bunch of paint, but its downtime is horrendous. It uses more ink per swing. Its whiting frames are, or not its whiting frames. Main Saver doesn't stack as well with it. There's no last-ditch effort in the spot it's in, so you can't just run an ability to get your ink back. You have other gear you need to run, so you can't run a whole lot of Main Saver. Dynamo became a game of having this immensely powerful swing, but you were slow and you didn't have a lot of them. And you had to manage exactly when you did that. Dynamo nowadays feels bad because it's basically traded off its weaknesses and strengths. Like, its ink efficiency is still bad, but it's not that bad, but in exchange its swings don't feel like this insanely powerful threat. They just feel like kinda normal. And that's just more boring. And then you take a weapon like Big Swig, that has ink efficiency issues, but not that bad, and has paint that is better, but flicks that aren't that powerful, and you have the same thing. Why do we have two weapons that feel similar in terms of, this balance of strengths and weaknesses? Why are they not more dynamic? Well, because they're both balanced weaker. You can't make them more distinct from each other without upping the power level. And so a lot of weaker weapons to me are more limited in what they need because we're not willing to make them strong enough to make them more distinct or different from each other. So finally, of course, is interactions. We have a game centered around Tacticooler, right? Tacticooler incentivizes interactions. Another thing Splatoon 3 did to incentivize interactions is they made things that didn't incentivize them weaker. So, for example, let's look at powerful specials in the game. Let's look at Tenta Missiles and what they did with Tenta Missiles. Tenta Missile weapons are generally 200p instead of 180p. I don't think a single one is 180 in this game, actually. I think they're at least 190. Right, so they increased the points for special, and then they also gave it a cooldown of 10 seconds. So what that did is if you played passively and just tried to spam missiles, you didn't get as much value. There was a longer time before your power spike that the special provided to be able to move in. That's one way of balancing around passive gameplay, which is to make the options weaker. However, if you think about it, this is not that different from how Splatoon 2 balanced its main weapons. You know, toned them all down to lower main weapon fighting power, and the end result was not good. Because of that, you might realize that with specials, there is an upper limit to what you can do. I'm not trying to say things like the missile change were bad. They're good. Specials should have been less frequent. The points for special increases across the board are generally good. But you can't just only do that. If the main weapons weren't powerful enough, if we didn't have this upper echelon of weapons that Cooler hard enables, it wouldn't be worth running a Cooler. If you did not have these main weapons that could go in and fight and really be powerful, Cooler would not be good. If you threw Cooler into early Splatoon 2, no one would pick it. Which feels insane to say, but I can say that with a whole lot of confidence because why? For what? What are you picking for? In this game, you have edit or swords or all the weapons I said at the start that go crazy with it. But if you didn't have those weapons, why not just have an extra special that's going to be a power spike? Because that's going to be a lot more consistent, because your main weapon power isn't going to be good enough. So in order for Tacticooler to work, there have to be main weapons that allow it to work. Because of that, there's a bit of a balance here between special power and main weapon power. You can't just disincentivize non-interaction, you also have to incentivize interaction. You have to say, okay, we made missiles way weaker, you can't use them as much to get in. But in exchange, your main weapons are going to be able to get in more on their own anyway. You won't need to have a Tenta Missiles, because your weapon will be good enough at doing things on their own sometimes to where you won't have to wait for your missiles as often, and your gameplay will be, you know, more interactive, more fun, blah, 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 blah. Stuff like that. But that relies on main weapons being able to do more things. So when we talked about the earlier problem, if you have that undercover problem of a more linear game plan generally, you're not going to have a whole lot more to do if you just nerf entry power. You're just going to have less things to do. Because the few times you're able to do something are just going to be less often through a game, and it's just going to feel worse. You have to make up for that in some way, shape, or form. And that's where main weapon power comes in. So, to summarize briefly, I think that generally main weapon power should be higher. I think that buff should be more experimental. I think that main weapon should get more creative changes. I think that even the upper echelon of weapons should be experimented with buffs. I think that main weapon power helps a lot with interactive gameplay, with making main weapons more distinct from each other, and with incentivizing interaction. I think that those are very important for long-term health of the game and the series as a whole. In fact, if we want to talk about future series health, I think if you want to do more creative ideas like 5v5, then main weapon power is practically essential to get right first, and maybe I'll do my own video on that. And so because of that, I think it is essential for this series to keep increasing that. And to its credit, Splatoon 3 has been doing that very slowly. Look at a class like Rollers, even the weaker Rollers, and their functionality is miles better than anything they were in Splatoon 2, and they feel a lot better because of that. Look at weapons like S-Blast and how they've been buffed to reach that vision. This is now a powerful main weapon with a lot of depth to it, with a lot of differences between its other versions that were originally more similar to it, like Range and Luna, that feel very distinct from each other and powerful in their own unique ways. I want more weapons to get the S-Splash treatment. I want more weapons to get the Wiper treatment, or even to get something like Splash. Like how that weapon got better jump RNG in a kid and all of that. But to do that, step one is making the main weapons better. All right, thanks for watching. I'll let you guys see the rest of the game.